Hello, and thank you for joining us for the latest in the Finborough Theatre series, looking at the work of Ukrainian artists and activists and campaigners in conjunction with our two Ukrainian plays series that's on until the 3rd of September. So that's Pussycat in Memory of Darkness and Take the Rubbish Out, Sasha. Today, we're very fortunate to have Tetyana Filevska joining us, who is the Ukrainian cultural manager, curator and art historian, who's creative director of the Ukrainian Institute. Her work focuses on 20th century Ukrainian avant-garde art with a particular specialism on Kazimir Malevich. She's also co-founder and former director of the Malevich Institute NGO. She's founder of numerous lecture cycles, conferences and events, and is the author of 3 books on art history. So I can't think of anybody better to join us today to kind of situate the 2 plays in the context of not only the theatre world, but also the fine arts world, and also learn a little bit more about the history of the kind of Ukrainian art, particularly over the 20th century, and thinking about how the plays connect and their message kind of connect with that history. So thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
I just wanted to start off by asking you a little bit about your work with the Ukrainian Institute, and maybe in particular hearing a little bit about your kind of program since and your upcoming program, and also maybe a little bit about how your work has changed, I imagine a huge amount since February in response to the war.
Of course it's changed, and as everything else in the lives of Ukrainians. But before the war started, the invasion started, because the war started actually 8 years ago, but the full-scale invasion in February. We at the Ukrainian Institute, which is Ukrainian public institution responsible for cultural diplomacy, intercultural relations, we were based mostly on the mission to make Ukraine visible in the world, because it was the largest European country that was also least known in Europe. And we were doing a lot to kind of raise awareness that Ukraine exists. But, since February, however, the unfortunate situation is, the world has discovered that there is a huge country, with its own culture, with its own language. And so now our mission is not so much making aware of Ukraine's existence, but actually making Ukraine more understandable. Because yes, everyone knows we exist, but very few people, or at least there is lack of understanding on who we are, what our culture is, and so we are trying to bring more information about it. And actually, it was kind of a coincidence, because we planned it a few years ago, but this year is the cultural season between Ukraine and UK that we're conducting together with the British Council. And it's a series of events, actually dozens of them, that started in June and will last throughout March. And in this series of art events, which I think shape the largest cultural cooperation between Ukraine and UK ever in history, we're trying to bring more Ukrainian culture to the UK, and to open Ukrainian culture to the UK audience, first of all. And so we have theater plays, music performances, translation, readings of Ukrainian authors, and so on and so forth, watching Ukrainian film in the festival. So it's a very large program that shows the vivid Ukrainian culture and its cultural heritage, its history, and hopefully, it will bring Ukraine closer to the UK audience.
Brilliant. And how, if people are interested in accessing those events, is the best way to find out about them through the Ukrainian Institute website?
It's either Ukrainian Institute site or the British Council site or our social media, or you can just go straight to the separate website. It's ukuac.org, where you have all the events on one page.
Fantastic. I think that I think there's a kind of, just speaking to audiences who've come out of seeing the 2 plays, I think something that people really want to do is to engage further in kind of support, supporting, watching, learning about kind of Ukrainian culture and art and things a great deal more. And I guess I don't know how I'm trying to phrase this kind of in the right way, but I'm wondering, you know, in the face of such kind of horrific scenes and in the face of the war, I think something that often artists end up doing is having to kind of it can feel almost difficult to justify art sometimes in the face of kind of such practical needs. What do you think? I personally think art always has a place and is immensely powerful and important. What do you think the kind of role of artists is in this conflict? Is there a kind of particular way you see artists responding?
Well, I think art is not only important, but it's necessary at the times of war, you know, because we are surrounded by so much horror, so much pain, so much despair that it's, you know, you just need to get your strength, your hope from somewhere, and it comes from art. And I think we have a huge splash of art of the time of war from our artists. I mean, of course, there is a problem also with arts and culture because of all the problems, of all the destroyed cultural heritage side because of the ruined actually economy, and cultural economy is part of it. So actually, culture is, you know, it's bloodless. It stays without any resource at the moment. Many artists had to flee the country. So there are certain problems to kind of, you know, usual infrastructure of artistic production, but at the same time, there is a huge necessity for artists to speak after first horrific weeks and months when we were speechless and we were not able to kind of, you know, reflect on what is happening, and we were kind of denying the reality first. I think there was another kind of wave of reaction, which was resulting in a huge amount of new art, both visual, written, you know. So there are a lot of new things happening. New films appear, new books and texts written about that. So of course, you know, we need time to reflect on everything, but the immediate reflection, the immediate reaction of artists, it's present, and it's quite big and visible. And I think we all needed, artists needed to kind of, you know, put their reflections into a kind of shape, the artistic shape. And also we as a society, as a Ukrainian society, need it. And because it's also therapeutical, you know, we kind of can go through this painful, traumatic experience together with this artistic, new artistic production, new artistic works. One of the first exhibitions that took place in Ukraine since the invasion was the exhibition in Art Arsenal, Ukraine's largest art institution, and it was called About Our Feelings, because this was very important for people kind of, you know, come together and just think about our feelings. How do we feel ourselves? Because it was really difficult kind of to stop from all this constant, you know, everyday routine. Everyone was trying to volunteer, do everything possible. First emergency things were done. And then we kind of needed to sit down a little bit, you know, slow down at least, and just try to understand how do we feel about all of this. And I think it's very important and crucial because the society is traumatized a lot. And, you know, our mental health, our emotional health is also part of our resistance in this war. We have to be resistant. We have to, you know, we have to keep on fighting for quite a long time, and we have to find the strength for being brave, for having hope, for moving on. And I think art has a crucial role in that.
That's really really interesting, and I think that's really moving as well to think of art, because I think so often we can position it as something that just uses up energy and can make artists feel very kind of burnt out, especially if it's kind of producing political works. But actually thinking about reclaiming art as something that can be restorative and create channels to kind of heal some of the kind of ongoing trauma. That sounds.
But at the same time, you know, culture is part of our identity, and this is what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the right to Ukrainians to have Ukrainian culture and to be able to kind of, you know, have it. And so I think if you know, if we stop being Ukrainians, if we stop kind of living in this culture and producing it, then you know what we are fighting for. I think it's crucial. And also, you know, aside of these internal kind of reasons and internal needs from within Ukrainian society, I think culture and art is the best way to speak with the world. And you know, we all realize that, you know, people cannot observe endlessly the photographs from the war and having all these tragic photographs on the first pages of media that lasted for the first month, but it's not there anymore. You know, we're not in the main pages anymore because people just can't endlessly look at these sufferings. And I think culture is one of the reasons and one of the means to keep this conversation, to keep this interest in Ukraine, and to remind that the war is there, we're still fighting, we still need help, but at the same time, you know, kind of opening up what we're fighting for, what we are. So I think it's crucial in many different ways.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more from sort of from my perspective as well. That's really resonated with directing Pussycat and Memory in Darkness, because that deals with the events of the kind of conflict in 2014 in eastern Ukraine. And I think for me, lots of those events felt very, you know, it was kind of a timeline of events, but actually having this story based on a real woman to kind of humanize it and see it through an individual lens was incredibly powerful, and just completely changed the way I kind of saw those events in terms of my understanding. So I think that's hugely powerful. I wonder if there's any Ukrainian artists that I'm sure you kind of are working with so many different artists, perhaps it's hard to choose, but are there any artists in particular that you think you'd really love to kind of share, or that you think that they're kind of creating really exciting work right now?
Well, speaking about contemporary artists, you know, it depends on what, if we're speaking about cinema or film or visual art or theater. And I think each of these genres has their brilliant artists in Ukraine nowadays. And, you know, it's really hard to pick one or a few. Of course, I have my kind of passions and my private favorites, but I think everyone can find something for themselves. And um, I don't know, I mean, you just have we have some tools in Ukrainian Institute to kind of get acquainted with Ukrainian art. We have different catalogs, we have different kind of datas with the list of artists, artistic institutions, initiatives, festivals, bands, groups, etc., etc. So, and of course, there's quite a lot of things happening at the moment around the world with exhibiting and representing Ukrainian art. So I would rather not name a few, but engage to know as many as possible.
I did realize I was slightly putting you on the spot there, so people can go and do the work themselves and find that through those tools. I think that's really brilliant. Yes. And it seems like I suppose one thing I was interested in as well is the way that to me it seems like the war has played out is that there's quite a strong kind of gendered aspect to it. Just in a kind of practical way, in terms of the roles that men and women have taken in the conflict. I wonder if you see that in kind of artistic expression as well. Are there kind of again, it's such a broad question, but do you see any kind of differences in the way that maybe some female artists are responding to the conflict or issues that they're highlighting?
Well, I know some families, you know, artistic families where men went to the armed forces and joined the territorial defense or the armed forces. You know, continued caring for their kids and actually more or less try to keep on with their artistic practices. And sometimes it's interesting that even, women are presenting both artists and kind of also speaking for their husbands on the artistic stage, while their husbands literally defend the countries they gone out of the front line. So we even have those examples, and they're quite few, I would have to say. I think everyone is speaking about war and about the pain, the traumas, the losses, the everything, everything that the war is bringing with itself, all the devastation. So I think it's just impossible for artists to speak about anything else at the moment. So even if there is going to be kind of a historic film shot these days, it will also be about this war, because it's just impossible not to speak about it. Whatever you speak about it, you speak about this war. It's also, important to understand that this war is not just something that started months ago or 8 years ago. The relationship between Ukraine and Russia for centuries were quite negative, and Russia abused Ukraine, and it was imperial power occupying Ukraine, and we were always fighting for the independence, for our sovereignty. And if you look up, our culture and history of 17th, 18th, 19th century, it was all about fighting the oppressor. So, for some of us, this is like a historical chance to finally fight back, to finally stop this abuse, this colonial relationship, and get our freedom once and for all, and never lose it again. So it's kind of it's not the matter of any kind of a political or something. It's the matter of existence. This is existential war. And on the opposite side, for Russians, it's a genocidal war, because what they want is just destroy our people, destroy our state, and kind of stop Ukrainians to exist. That gives you reason and force to fight.
I can't, I can't really imagine it. There's no words really. I'm just going to check. Have I lost?
Where? At
Sorry,
what point?
I don't know where it froze. I think you were just kind of, I think, wrapping up, actually, I think, talking about the kind of the way that the way this kind of has been an ongoing, not a theme's the wrong word, but the scale and the kind of length that's been going on, how that's been a kind of frequent motif in Ukrainian artists' work, and kind of essential to understanding Ukrainian culture, which I think it's a real we're now being affected by the Zoom gods. But I think I was just going to say, I think one thing that the UK and Western Europe are really having to reckon with is just how long this has been going on for, and just having to kind of deal with and atone for the way, the fact that Ukrainians have been trying to raise the alarm and been doing so in such kind of a courageous, brilliant way for so long, and how little the kind of the West has done. So I think it's I think it's going to be quite interesting as well for people now kind of looking back on that canon of work, as you say, and really kind of starting to put together kind of our role as well with that, and to kind of understand that better. I wondered in particular if there's and again, this is kind of a tricky, we were discussing this a little bit before we started filming, but your kind of specialism is Kazimir Malevich, and I wondered if you see any particular, and as you put it, he was kind of hard to pin down in terms of group or kind of affiliation or kind of political identity, but I know he was in many ways kind of very critical of sort of political censorship and oppression. and that kind of relationship between Russia and Ukraine. I wonder if in what way you see, I guess firstly kind of just a little bit more about that, and then maybe also the ways that might be being paralleled now with kind of contemporary arts.
Yeah, I think these parallels between beginning of 20th century and today have their kind of foundation. And even before the invasion, we had a series of talks between in Ukrainian community between the parallels of the avant-garde of the 20s and of the new 20s of the third millennium. And there are several things that kind of connect us through this century. One is the cultural renaissance, and this is something that we know from history about 1920s, that it was a cultural renaissance and a new generation of artists in all genres, literature first of all, but also visual art, theater, cinema, and all kinds of art. They just had a period of blossomness, and this was a period of blossomness of Ukrainian culture. They were all writing in Ukrainian. They were working with Ukrainian topics and narratives. Sorry, and they considered themselves Ukrainian. So that was a kind of very important and a fascinating period in our history. And then it ended tragically, because in the 30s, when the Red Terror started, literally the whole generation of these artists, creatives, they were killed and they were assassinated. They were sent out to camps. And within a few years, they just literally physically destroyed the whole artistic scene of Ukraine, and it just ceased to exist. And tragically, we didn't even know about this for decades. And just after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after we had access to the archive, after people were not scared to speak anymore, we just learned that there was this huge cultural renaissance in Ukraine that generations of people didn't remember about anymore. It was not in our school books. It was not on our bookshelves. We didn't know anything about it. And now we have started to bring it back, bring it out of the shadow. And also in contemporary Ukrainian situation, it kind of repeated again, because after the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, we had another kind of wave of cultural uprisal, of cultural renaissance, with new cultural institutions, with a new strong generation of artists, creators, and very strong cultural projects and initiatives and art pieces. And, it was already on its, kind of very high point before the invasion started. And now, since many of people, as I told you, many creatives and artists went to the front line and are getting killed. I mean, we have already a list of artists, of dancers, actors who were killed in this war. And these are not just single examples. These are dozens of people. So, I mean, again, we're in danger of losing a creative scene of Ukraine, literally, physically, be getting them killed. And this is something, of course, we cannot allow. We just must, stop it. We have to keep this creative potential, this creative power alive and working and continuing with their work, because, as I told, this is what we're fighting for, to have our culture. So yeah, I think there are parallels between back then, but there is the difference is also there, because back then there was no kind of Ukrainian state that expanded its culture, and now we have a very strong state. We have a very strong army. Ukrainian armed forces are our heroes. They're allowing us to kind of continue living and having a morning coffee tomorrow, and they are the reason that and part of our tomorrow and of our culture that cannot just be exterminated again. We just cannot allow this to happen.
think that's incredibly. I mean, I'm struggling to find words that don't seem trite in response to such kind of. It's this such integrity and courage and dignity and just I feel like artists all over the world are going to take so much, kind of draw so much inspiration and strength from the example shown by this kind of was not just one generation but kind of several generations of Ukrainian artists responding to this conflict, and kind of over, and also, as you say, it's not just, you know, since February, but also over the last 8 years and before that as well. If there was one thing, and again, this is I'm asking another kind of huge question that I know there's no easy answer to, but I wonder if there was one thing that you wanted a kind of a UK audience to understand or to take away, maybe about the work of the Ukrainian Institute, or about the conflict in general, or about the kind of art world's interaction with it, what would be the one thing that you'd like people to go away, and it could be something that you'd want them to do, or something to think about, or just a kind of a thought?
The one thing is that, you know, if we win in this war, Ukraine will survive and continue its existence, and our culture will go on. And but we will not be able to just by ourselves, just alone. We need support and we need help of other countries and the whole world, you know, to fight this huge totalitarian, authoritarian, terroristic state of Russia. And because I think if, you know, if we don't get enough sources, power, support, the danger will come closer to Western Europe and to the UK, because, you know, they're not going to stop anywhere. It's just the Leviathan that's eating everything on its way. And as I told you, know, this is not just an 8 years and 6 months war. It's a war that was lasting for decades and centuries, and it's the existential war for Ukraine. It's just a matter of our existence as a nation, as people, as a culture. And I think even if you think that you cannot really do much about it, you can discover Ukraine, and you can learn about it. And as Oksana Zabushko, our famous writer, told a few days ago in the Edinburgh Cultural Summit when she was speaking, giving her keynote, you cannot really mourn, you cannot really feel sorry for losing something you never knew about. You know, so we really want you to know what Ukraine is, and in order to prevent it from being destroyed and from being from disappearing. So my kind of, you know, message to everyone and call is just discover Ukraine. You know, learn something about it. Read a book of Ukrainian writer, watch a Ukrainian movie, find out more about Ukraine, and you will understand why we're fighting so bravely, so outrageously, because we really have what to defend.
I think that's such a wonderful, and actually it's such a message of hope as well, and I think that's and something where people can feel kind of proactive as well, and do something, because I think so often you're watching these things happen, as you say, you feel like you can't do anything, but that's, I think, just, yeah, to know Ukraine, I think that's a beautiful message. Thank you so much for taking part in this interview and for sharing everything. I'm personally definitely going to go and attend as many of the events and you know, watch the online cultural offerings as well, and kind of engage with it. So thank you so much for sharing that and all the work that you're doing as well. It's hugely appreciated.
Thank you for putting, you know, Ukraine in the center of your attention and your work, and it's really important. Thanks a lot.